voter in our state participates in the election. Every eligible voter in our nation participates in the election. But we want to make sure that people understand what steps they need to take in order to cast their vote and make sure their vote is counted. It's certainly been made more complicated because of COVID-19. We want to make sure people stay safe. We know that we're still in the middle of this pandemic. We want to make sure that the system that's in place in Maryland is one in which the voter can make the decision as to how he or she wants to cast her ballot or his ballot, in what manner, and we want to make sure they understand the options that are available, and then what to expect leading up to November 3rd, and after the polls close on November 3rd, what can we expect? So, Nikki, I'd like to start with you, if I might. You are the Deputy State Administrator. Explain to me exactly what the State Board of Elections responsibilities are about on the November 3rd election. After all, we do have 24 subdivisions in our state, and we know that when it comes to the actual getting information about our own particular voting status, many times we have to check with our local election board. So please explain to us how the state election board works and state administration works in relationship to our counties.
Sure. Well, first, thank you very much for having me here today. I really appreciate the opportunity to share information about the election. We're getting lots of questions and happy to have these forums to help us get the word out. So in Maryland, election administration is very centralized. Most of the policies and procedures and equipment that run an election are coming out of the State Board of Elections. And one of the benefits of that is in our very mobile population, that as voters move from county to county, the voting process for them is seamless. It looks the same, it feels the same, it's the same equipment. And so we really get the benefit of having an educated voting population as they move from county to county. But as I said, it's very centralized in Maryland. We work very closely with the local boards of elections, which there's one in every county, as you've said. They are our partners. We are supporting them and helping them answer questions from voters, getting information out via our website that can let voters know the status of their mail-in ballot if that's what they've asked for. And so it is, while we are centralized, we are partners, and we can do without it. Most of what voters see on election day is the tremendous work of the local boards, the voting locations, the poll workers. All of that is really due to the tireless efforts of our local election officials.
Voters has been known for generations as being a nonpartisan source for information about elections. Certainly, our elections have changed over time, but the League of Women Voters seems to be timeless in its participation in our elections. Explain to me exactly what is the mission of the League of Women Voters? What are you trying to achieve? And how do you see this election, the challenges that you have?
Well, thank you, Senator, for inviting the League to participate. And thank you for your very generous remarks about our role. The League is dedicated to an informed and active citizenry. And our mission is to get information to the voters about both how the process works and the candidates and issues. And our premier publication is the Voter's Guide. We have a voter's guide for every county in the state of Maryland that is available on our state league website, lwvmd.org. So whatever county you are in, you can go there, go to our website, see the voter's guide, and it will have information not just for the federal offices, but also the local offices. A number of our counties are electing boards of education or county council members, and there are a lot of ballot questions, and you'd much rather read about those in the voter's guide in the comfort of your home than be surprised in the voting booth on election day.
It's true that every voter in Maryland will have the opportunity to vote for the president and vice president of the United States. That will be the same on every ballot in our state. But for Congress, we have 8 congressional districts, and each citizen lives in one of those 8 congressional districts, and they'll have an opportunity to vote for their member of Congress. It'll be different in different congressional districts. But different counties have different other offices that may be on the ballot. There might be council people that are on the ballot, or the mayor of Baltimore, or school boards may be on the ballot, depending on the county and whether they have local elections. In some counties, there are no local elections, but there's some other additional ballot elections. We have judges that stand for election, that in some cases it can be competitive. In some cases, it's a retention, yes or no. So we do have judges that can also be on the ballot. In this election, we have 2 statewide questions that are on the ballot. One dealing with a budget process and the power of the General Assembly, the other dealing with sports betting in the state. But in addition to those state 2 questions, many counties have local questions that are on the ballot that might deal with charter amendments or might deal with bond issues. So the League of Women Voters can really give you a guide for what is on the ballot in your county where you vote, and give you an objective information that can be your primary source. It may encourage you to get more information before you make your decisions, but we want everyone to be an informed voter. So, Ralph, I really do appreciate the fact that the League of Women Voters has made that a lot easier for us to try to figure out what is on the ballot in our particular jurisdiction in which we vote. So let's get to voting, because this election is different than any other election we've had in our history as to how you can vote. It's not going to be the same as it was in the primary. It's not going to be the same as it was 2 years ago or 4 years ago. We have developed different procedures, and the state board has recommended to the governor, and the governor has made those decisions, and we're implementing those decisions. And we did that primarily because of COVID-19 and the challenges caused by COVID-19. COVID-19 not only brought us the challenge of the public health challenge, and a lot of people do not want to be with other people, and they want the safety of being able to vote by marking a ballot by absentee and putting it in the mail or a drop box, but also the fact that it's more difficult to get the personnel to conduct an election in the traditional way we did 2 and 4 years ago, because again, we relied on primarily older people that worked our election booths. That's not exclusive, but we had a lot of older people, and they are very concerned because of the vulnerability of COVID-19. So, Nikki, how can you vote in Maryland? Here I am. I'm a registered voter. What should I expect? What can I do? What are my options?
So thank you. So that's been a good question that we've had from lots of voters. And so there's 2 general options, and we're encouraging voters to think about it now, make a plan now. You can vote by mail, or you can vote in person. If you want to vote by mail, which means we can mail the ballot to your house, you can vote it, and then you can either mail it back or you can put it in a ballot drop-off box. You need to act now. We have to receive your request by next Tuesday, October 20th. So if that's something that interests you, please go online and submit a request, print out the form. We did mail forms to all eligible voters at the end of August, beginning of September. So if you want to vote by mail, the time to act is now. If you want to...
From the primary, in the primary, the actual ballot was mailed out to the voters. In the general election, you did do a mail out, but it was a mail out of an application to get the ballot. So unless that application is mailed in and received by October 20th, you will not be able to vote by absentee ballot. I just really want to underscore that point. You have to get that application back by the 20th, and then you will be mailed a second mailer, which will actually be your ballot. Thank you. Continue, Nikki.
That's exactly right. So in the primary in June, we sent ballots to everybody, but this time we're not. It's a 2-step process. You have to request the ballot. We're going to mail it to you, and then you have to vote the ballot. So thank you for clarifying that. So yes, if you want to vote by mail, you have to submit a request, and that request has to be received by the 20th. If you want to vote in person, we are having early voting like normal, and we're having election day like normal, but there are some significant differences. So early voting is running from October 26th through November 2nd. So the 8 days leading up to election day. There'll be 81 locations, which is normal for us. But so there'll be at least one location in every county, but it runs from October 26th through November 2nd, including Saturday and Sunday. And then election day is November 3rd. And this is one of the significant changes, is that your neighborhood polling place is going to be closed. As you, Senator Cardin, indicated, we struggled early on to find poll workers. Many of them fall into the age bracket that is at higher risk for COVID-19, and we understand, and they declined to serve. We were grateful for a huge surge in younger people signing up to serve as election judges. But reducing the number of locations is beneficial for a couple reasons. One, we can use larger facilities. I mean, some of our facilities are as large as FedEx and Camden Yards, where we can process a whole lot more voters in a safer environment than our community center room. So the larger facilities mean we can process more voters, and we can implement social distancing inside of those. But it does mean there are less locations. There's 321 statewide, at least several in every county. But it is important to keep in mind that your neighborhood polling place is closed, and that you can, on our website or in your sample ballot you'll get in the mail, learn where the closest or most convenient voting location is to you.
I want to back up here a little bit. This is Facebook Live. We've gotten several questions related to these issues. First, and I'm going to get to first, Tim asked a very good question, and that is, if I, on election day, go to the place that I think I would vote, my normal voting place, and I see it closed, will there be any signage up at these places to explain why the voting place is closed, and telling you where you can vote in the county? Or how do you intend to make sure the voters know that just because their traditional voting place is closed, there's still an opportunity to vote?
So there will be signs at the normal polling places telling voters where the other voting locations are in the county that day. We'll also be mailing sample ballots out to everybody who hasn't asked for an absentee ballot. And in there will be a list of all of the voting locations in the county. So there will be signs on election day. Of course, we hope that voters know that and don't divert their path to vote by going somewhere that's closed. But there will be signs directing them to other voting locations that day.
Ralph, Nikki raised a very good point, and she urged every voter in Maryland to have a plan for voting. If your plan is that you feel comfortable, that you would like to be able to vote by mail because you're not comfortable voting in person, you should have already made that arrangement. You should have already requested your ballot, but you still have a few days left to request that ballot, and then you'll get a ballot in the mail, and we'll get to this, but as long as it's postmarked by election day, November the 3rd, and received within, I think it's I have the exact number of days. It's got to be received by no later than, somebody help me on this, November 13th. It's got to be received by November 13th. It will be counted. But as I said, you should have already made these arrangements so that you get your ballots in as early as possible. And then you can do that by dropping it off at one of the drop-off locations, which I really want to compliment the election board. It's very clear in the information you sent out to us in the ballots as to where we can drop them off. We can drop them off, but we can do that in many drop places in the county in which we are registered to vote. So, Ralph, has the League of Women Voters been, how have you dealt with the confusion of this election being different than any other one that we've had? Are you getting confused questions from the people who rely on the League of Women Voters for reliable, nonpartisan information? After all, I can tell you, the credibility of our partisan leaders on voting isn't always the highest with the people in our community as to how you vote.
We have, thank you, Senator. We've been getting quite a few calls to local leagues and also to our state office, and we are answering those as fast as we can. We've also tried to put out a lot of social media announcements, reminding people about the changes, and wherever possible, providing links to the State Board of Elections website. You can do just about anything on the State Board of Elections website, so it's pretty handy to just refer people there. Even you mentioned filling out the paper application for an absentee ballot. If you have a Maryland driver's license, you can go online on the State Board of Elections website and ask for that mail-in ballot directly on the website and save some time for you and the board staff. So we've been trying to steer people to the State Board of Elections website for the most reliable information.
So several of people who have written in questions about who can drop off the ballots. I got my ballot in the mail. I filled it out. Now I would like to take it to a drop box. It's got to be in the county in which I live. And I want to take that in, but do I have to personally drop it off on the drop box, or can someone else drop it off for me? Nikki, what's the answer to that? This is a question directly Diane in Owings Mills.
So you can have somebody else take your ballot either to a drop-off box or the local board. We of course advise voters that they should treat that ballot carefully and make sure they're giving it to somebody that they know. But somebody else can take your ballot to either the local board office or the ballot drop-off box.
About this, I have total confidence that the U.S. Postal Service will deliver your ballot. It is so. You can put it in the mail and it will get to the election board in plenty of time. So if you have your ballot now and you want to fill it in, you want to put it in the mail, it's going to get to the election board. So our U.S. Postal Service is the most reliable postal service in the world. So that's another option for you, and I just want to make sure you understand that. So we had a question from a person in Gaithersburg. How long will it take after I put my ballot in one of those drop boxes before it will be acknowledged? As you said, Nikki, you can check the status of your ballot on the internet. How long will it take after I put it into that drop box before I should be able to see that it has actually been received by checking the status?
So the election officials are emptying those boxes at least once a day, and they take them back to the election office. And there's one more step that has to happen before then the data gets updated for our website. And the local board has to basically scan the barcode that's on the envelope to receive it in the system. So that can take a couple of days. There's a lot of ballots coming in. There are a lot of applications coming into process. And so we ask voters to be patient, to keep checking the website. Most of them are scanning them the day they receive them, but in the larger counties where there's more volume, it's taking them a little bit longer to scan them in. But if you put it in a ballot drop-off box, it's been collected by a local election official and it's in their office waiting for that last step to be scanned. And so I would give it up to a week to show received. But I'm confident that if you put it in a box, the local board of elections has it.
I want to clarify where you can vote, because I think this is very important. You're actually getting your ballot from your county board of elections, and it's returned to your county board of elections. They're the ones that are going to count the ballots, at least initially, on the county election, on the state elections. So if I live in Baltimore County and I want to vote absentee, I can certainly put it in the mail, and my return address is to the local election board. But can I put it in any drop box in Maryland, or do I have to put it only in the drop boxes that are located in Baltimore County?
So we recommend that voters drop off their ballot at a box in their county. We appreciate that that's going to happen, and the local boards will move the ballots from county to county. But the preference is, and the quickest way to get your ballot in the hands of the local election official for counting is to put it in a box in your county.
Number two, second point. I didn't follow your advice, and I didn't make my plans as I should have on how I was going to vote. It's now 7:30 on November the 3rd, 7:30 p.m., and I'm decided I better get my vote in. But I work in Baltimore City. I live in Baltimore County. The closest election place, it looks like, is in Baltimore City. Can I go into Baltimore City and vote even though I'm a Baltimore County resident?
So that process will involve you voting what's called a provisional ballot, because you're voting outside of your county. That you will get a ballot. You'll have to fill out a provisional ballot application, and then you'll put the ballot inside the envelope given to you by a poll worker. So what will happen is when Baltimore City receives that, they will look to see your vote for president would count. If you happen to be in a voting center with the same congressional district, then your vote for Congress would count. So they'll make an assessment as to which of those contests you voted for that you're eligible to vote for, and they'll count those. But your vote for president, your vote for the statewide ballot questions would count. And then after that, it would just depend whether you were eligible based on your Baltimore County address. So you could still vote for president, but you'd be voting a provisional ballot.
So Ralph, I assume the League of Women Voters is interested in full empowerment, and every vote on the ballot is important to participate in. You would encourage, more than encourage, strongly suggest that you vote in the county in which you're registered in so that you can participate in all of the ballot issues?
Absolutely. If it's it's as in the situation you described, where there just physically is not time to get to a home voting center. Well, okay, vote in a different place, but you want your vote to count for everything, and your daily life is affected by a lot of local decisions. It's important to have your voice heard locally. So make a plan to vote in your home county.
And make a plan. Don't wait till 7:30 on election night, because guess what? There might be very long lines, and the weather could be iffy, and you might have other plans, or your spouse may have other plans for you that night, and you may not be able to wait 3 or 4 hours to vote. And I can tell you, we've seen around the nation already long lines. So when I mean long lines, we've seen 3, 4, 5 hour lines already. We're not anticipating and hoping that's not the case in Maryland. We want to see everybody vote, but we hope that people will take advantage of voting with early voting and absentee voting, and we won't have that type of a rush at the 11th hour to vote in our state. But make your plans now as to when if you want to vote in person on election day, that's fine, but get to the polls early and get to a poll that's in your county so that you can fully participate on all the ballot issues, as well as the national offices and the local offices that might be on the ballot. So we have a question from Teresa in Elkridge about individuals with disabilities that need help. Now, what arrangements can be made that so someone who has, let's say, is visually impaired and needs someone to help them fill out a ballot, someone who has a disability and would need special arrangements to vote in person, what arrangements are made for people who have challenges? Someone who perhaps is not proficient in the English language, but is a citizen and is entitled to vote. What help is available to those individuals? Want to start us off?
Sure, thank you. I'll start first with voters with disabilities and then move on to voters who English is not their first language. So voters with disabilities have the same options that voters who don't have disabilities have. They can choose to vote by mail, We have, we're one of the first states to offer a fully accessible way for a voter to receive and mark a mail-in ballot. So they can request to receive their ballot electronically. Any voter can ask to receive it that way. But for voters with disabilities, it becomes a way that they can receive and mark their ballot independently and privately. So they can get their ballot electronically and use our online ballot marking tool to make their selections, print out the ballot, and mail it back. So that is an option for voters with disabilities, as well as voting in person. Every voting location in the state will have at least one unit that is designed for voters with disabilities. It is similar to a touchscreen, so the font can be enlarged, the contrast can be changed. There are earphones for the audio ballot. So that device allows voters with different kinds of disabilities to make their selections on their own. It prints out a paper ballot that is then scanned. So there are private and independent ways for voters with disabilities to vote. There's also, every voting location will have a way to assist voters who are unable to stand in line, and to be able to assist voters who maybe need a little help, either from poll workers, or they can bring their own helper with them. For voters with disabilities, for voters who English is their second language, Prince George's and Montgomery offer all voting materials in Spanish, as well as written materials in different languages. And anybody who needs assistance voting can bring someone in to help them. So if the person needs assistance understanding the ballot, they can certainly bring someone in to help them.
Ralph?
Yeah, I wanted to add that we're really pleased this year, for the first time, our voters' guides are available in an accessible format for blind and visually impaired voters who use a screen reader type of technology. On our state website, each of the voters' guides is available in that accessible format. And also, at least in Montgomery County, the voter's guide is available in Spanish. Thanks to a partnership with El Tiempo Latino, it is available in Spanish in all of their distribution points, and on the Montgomery County website, the League of Women Voters of Montgomery County website as well.
My guests today on Facebook Live are Nikki Charlson, who is the Deputy State Administrator of the State Board of Elections, and Ralph Watkins. I don't know why it was someone else earlier today. Ralph Watkins, who is the Vice President for Voter Services at the League of Women Voters. I want to ask the question which is puzzling to a lot of my constituents, and that is, do they need to have a voter identification card, a picture ID, in order to legally cast a ballot? And we noticed that on some of the applications, there was a requirement that you had to have some form of identification. Can you explain, when do you need to have identification to vote?
So most voters in Maryland do not need to bring ID to vote. You will, when you show up to vote in person, the election judge will ask you a series of questions for you to identify yourself, and that's sufficient. Under state law, if a voter wants to vote by a mail-in ballot and get that ballot electronically, then there is an additional authentication process. There's a driver's license number that's needed and social security number, but that is limited just to voters who want to get their ballot electronically. For voting in person, most people just go in and answer the questions that the election judge poses, and they authenticate themselves that way.
I appreciate that. So another question we get is that I forgot to register. I'm eligible to register. Is there any possibility I can still vote in the Maryland election, even though I believe I'm past the deadline for registering prior to the election? But I heard something about you can vote by registering on election day. How do I go about doing that?
So Maryland Maryland does have same-day registration during early voting and election day. So while Tuesday, the 13th, was the deadline to register to vote, there's sort of one last chance, and that's going in person during early voting or election day. You'll need to bring a proof of residency with you so we can establish where you live to make sure we get you the right ballot. But there is a second chance in person during early voting or election day at any of the voting locations throughout the state.
But does that have to be in the county in which I'm a resident in? Or can I go to any of the early voting locations or any of the election day locations and register to vote, even though it's not in my county?
Again, the preference is to go in the county where you live. So as Ralph so eloquently said, so you can be eligible to vote for all of the contests on your ballot. So the goal would be is to go to a voting location in the county where you live, bring that proof of residency, and we'll go ahead and register you to vote, and you can vote. Just keep in mind, it might take you a little bit longer because you're doing two processes at that voting location instead of just voting.
So let me ask both of you this. Look, people change their minds. They mark a ballot and they said, oh, gee, I made a mistake. Now, if you're voting in person, there's a chance that you could change that. But now I have an absentee ballot and I really don't like the decision I made. I haven't dropped it off yet. Is there any possibility that I can void that ballot and get a different ballot? Or can I just not vote with the ballot I have? I won't mail it in. I'm not going to vote more than once, but just show up at the polls on election day and cast my ballot that way and just not turn in my ballot that was sent to me. Ralph, I'm going to let you start first to see how good you are on these election laws, and we'll see what, I know Nikki knows the answers to these.
My understanding is that indeed I can submit another request for an absentee ballot. In fact, I did so because I made a mistake. And I included a note that I made a mistake. I would like a replacement ballot. Obviously, if it was the day before the election and I made that mistake, there's no possibility a ballot could be mailed to me in time to do that. And that would be a situation where I would go to a voting center and I could vote using a provisional ballot. I can't be issued an ordinary ballot because the system will show I've already been issued an absentee ballot, mail-in ballot. So that is my understanding, that there are two ways to do that, and Nikki will confirm whether I am right or wrong.
So Ralph is an honorary employee of the State Board of Elections, so everything he said was correct.
But if I just change my mind, I said, gee, you know, this is such an historic election. I want my grandchildren to see me at the polls voting. I'm going to go and vote myself. I know I have this ballot here, but I really want to vote. By the way, I can drop my ballot off on election day at one of the voting places at a drop-off spot. So I can vote by mail on election day by dropping it off at one of the voting places. But let's say I just prefer not to use my ballot at all. I want to vote in person. Can I do that? Nikki?
So yes, you can do that. You will be voting what's called a provisional ballot because we have flagged you as someone who's already received a ballot. And the safeguard to the system is to have you vote a provisional ballot, which we will count as long as we do not also receive the other ballot. So this is one of the ways that we can protect the system and only count one ballot from each person. So you can do that. You'll vote a provisional ballot, which as long as we don't get your other ballot in the mail, the local election official will go ahead and count that provisional ballot.
So let me make a plea on behalf of our election officials, and that is, as Nikki said in the beginning, have a game plan for voting. If you're going to vote absentee by mail, get that ballot in early. Don't change your mind on election day and show up, because it presents more work for those that are at the polls. And we are trying to move those lines as quickly as possible because of the convenience that are people that are there, as well as the public health risk, the more people that are together. So make your plans. If you want to vote in person, by all means vote in person, but don't request an absentee ballot, because that provides additional level of time that's going to be necessary at the polling places, and it just adds to the community risk on the spread of COVID-19. That's just my view. I hope people recognize, vote the way you want to vote. I can tell you this, Myrna and I voted absentee. We did that for a couple reasons. Our vote has already been, we've already sent in our ballots, we dropped them off, it's already been acknowledged that it's been received. We did that because first, we think it's the safest way to vote, because we're not putting ourselves at risk or anyone else at risk. And secondly, we think it'll make it easier for those who want to vote in person to be able to vote in person safely and in a timely way. And so I just urge people to recognize this, get a game plan, and follow that game plan. If you want to vote in person, I would urge you to consider voting, early voting, rather than on election day itself. It's just uncertain as to how long it's going to take and how many people are going to be at the polling places. That's just my advice, but it's certainly your decision. The only plea I make that I think is non-negotiable, you need to vote. You need to participate in this election. So have your game plan as to how you're going to go about doing this. So let's talk a little bit about voter integrity, because that's been an issue that's been raised a couple times. It's a felony to vote more than once. How do you know someone hasn't voted more than once? Nikki, what protections do we have in the system to make sure someone is not trying to vote more than once?
So throughout the election process, there are checks and balances for a variety of, a variety of different issues. One of which is making sure that we only count one ballot from each voter. And it starts with the voter registration list and the issuing of mail-in ballots. That when I received my mail-in ballot, that ballot packet had a unique tracking number. Or in Ralph's case, his had a unique tracking number. When he asked for a replacement ballot, that process voided the first ballot. And so while he still has possession of that ballot, that tracking number has been voided. So if he were to have returned both of his ballots, that would raise a flag in the system at the local board of elections, and they would know, wait a minute, I've already received a ballot from this voter, or this ballot tracking number has been voided. And that is one way for us to very clearly raise a flag and put that aside, and so we can do some more investigation. In terms of in-person voting, and we use electronic poll books to check in voters, and those are networked together. So if I go to an early voting center in the morning in my county and then go to another one in the evening or instantly, driving from one to the other, the poll book is going to reflect that I've already voted. And so that's a way that we can protect the integrity of the in-person voting process in a similar way to how we protect the integrity of the mail-in process. Is if you try to vote more than once, when you go to that second place, the only way you're going to get to vote is a provisional ballot, because we show that you've already voted. And so you can choose to vote that provisional ballot, but when we do the research and see you've already voted, that ballot will be rejected. And then we also will notify you that you have voted. It appears that you voted more than once, and that's not something you should do.
So let me just clarify this. If I voted in one location in Baltimore County, because now on election day, I don't need to vote in my home precinct. I can vote in any of the voting locations in Baltimore County. And I vote there at 10 o'clock in the morning. And I go to a different voting location in Baltimore County at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. The electronic registrar will show that I have already voted once, and they will pull me and not give me another ballot. Am I correct on that, Nikki?
That's right. You will get only a provisional ballot, but yes, the poll book will reflect that you've already voted, and you won't be able to get another ballot that you can scan.
And I'm just going to make an observation. If I then file a provisional ballot, and in fact, it's my second ballot, I might want to also hire a lawyer at the same time, because I could be violating a very serious criminal law. The vote will not be counted, and I'm in danger of criminal responsibility. Ralph, do you get any questions about that from concerns about the integrity of the system?
we get people who are concerned, and especially because mail-in voting is new and they're not familiar with it. And I tell people have been trying to cheat at elections ever since we've been holding elections. And our whole election machinery has been designed to ensure that the process is safe and somebody who's trying to cheat isn't going to succeed. When I submit a mail-in ballot, it gets checked in the poll book just the same as when I am showing up in person. A record is made, this person's vote is here, and it blocks me from submitting another.
And I will tell you, there's been numerous studies done throughout Maryland and throughout the nation, and the amount of intentional voter fraud is minuscule. We don't want to see any, but it's minuscule. On the other side of the ledger, we know that there have been efforts made to make it more difficult for people to be able to cast their ballots and have their ballots counted. We've seen obstructionist practices that have been done, some of which are illegal, some of which have been prosecuted. So if I find a concern about trying to cast my ballot that either I go to a voting place and it's not functioning right, or something is wrong, or somebody is trying to intimidate me from casting my vote, what should I do? Is there a recourse that I can go to as an effort to try to bring to the proper authorities' attention where I think someone is trying to interfere with my right to cast my vote? Let's say I show up at one of the drop-off spots and I find that there are people there that are telling me that you better not put your ballot in here or something on that line. What should I do? Nikki, any thoughts?
Sure. So a lot in your question. I guess if you're in person and there's an issue, always vote the provisional ballot, because that gives us lots of time to figure out what to do with it. If you walk away without voting and there's not enough time for you to get back, our ability to help you is limited. So even if you're unhappy with voting the provisional, vote it, because then we can help sort that out after Election Day. In terms of in person, either dropping a ballot off in person or voting in person, our Attorney General yesterday issued some guidance for voters. It's on their website, where if you feel intimidated, the Attorney General's office has a hotline that you can call. We will be obviously working very closely with them to make sure that doesn't happen. And we have good partnerships with federal, state, and local law enforcement to be able to respond if that happens. But if it is voter intimidation, the number is the Attorney General's office, and I can get you that number in just a minute. And so they're there to help. And of course, obviously, state and local election officials are there too. And we can support them, or we can take the lead if it's something less than voter intimidation. If it's about electioneering or other behavior, we can also participate in trying to resolve that as quickly as possible.
I believe the AG's hotline number is 1-800-222-8683. If that's not correct, my staff will correct me, and we'll make sure we correct it before the end of the broadcast. But I have 1-800-222-8683. That's for voter deception and voter fraud. I also have a national number of a nonpartisan voter integrity group. This is nonpartisan in regards to concerns nationally. 866 Our Vote is another hotline number in regards to voter intimidation and fraud. Ralph?
I wanted to add something to what Nikki said about voting a provisional ballot. I have heard some people who should know better, say, oh, they don't count the provisional ballots unless the election is close. That is not true. In Maryland, unless you have already submitted another ballot, or unless you are truly not a registered voter and not qualified to vote, they are going to count that ballot. As Nikki explained, if you're in the wrong congressional district, Well, obviously you don't get a vote there, but we're going to count it for every race that it can be counted.
That's a very important point, Ralph. Thanks for underscoring that. Provisional ballots are exactly the same as a regular ballot once it's counted, and it is counted before the elections are certified. So it will be in the final count. And I want to underscore this point. Every vote is important, particularly this year when you've seen so many people question how this election is taking place. We need your participation. We're all united on voting. So absolutely, we hope that you vote well before November 3rd or on November 3rd at your appropriate voting place and your full ballot is accepted. But if that's not the case, make sure you vote by provisional ballot, as Nikki has said, so that you can make sure that if you're eligible to vote, your vote does count. So it's a very important point. Which really brings me to the next question for Nikki. When are we going to know who won the election in Maryland? Are you going to be able to tell us at 8:01 what's happening in our state?
Well, it's right. So election night, there will be results. That I promise you. So once the voting ends on election night, we'll be releasing two sets of results. We will release results from early voting. So the in-person voting that happened from October 26th through November 2nd, that will be one set of results. And we'll also release results of those mail-in ballots that have already been counted. The local boards of elections were authorized to start counting ballots early, which is giving us a head start and giving us more results to be able to release on election night. But for us in Maryland, voting and ballots, not voting, but we count ballots for about 10 days after election day. So for us, election day isn't the end, it's sort of the beginning, it's the middle. We still have days more of counting, and we will be counting ballots for, well, as long as it takes us to finish counting. I will sort of go out on a limb and think that some of the smaller counties will be finished by the 13th. They'll be finished by their normal time frame. I do expect that the larger counties will take longer than the 13th to finish counting ballots. But as you so eloquently said, we will count ballots until we're done. And so our commitment is to do that. But allowing us to start counting ballots early means that we'll be able to wrap up more quickly. But election night results are just a snapshot in time. We won't know what percentage they represent because we don't know how many more ballots are going to be coming in the mail the next day or the day after that, because they would be timely as long as they're postmarked on or before November 3rd.
And I want to underscore this point. There may be projections that are made by news networks or those who do polling in regards to those who leave election places. The only results that matter are what are certified by the election board after every vote is counted. The certified election results are what we go by. My staff has told me the number I gave you earlier must have been a deceptive practice number, but for the attorney generals, their intimidation and harassment number is 833-282-0960. 833-282-0960. And though Nikki may not want me to give out this number, the State Board of Elections general number is 800-222-8683. We want to make sure you get all the information you need. So this is a question I guess I will answer. Some people say, why bother voting? After all, Maryland's votes will be done by our electors. We don't vote. It's the electors who vote for the president of the United States. So what difference does it make how we vote if it's only going to be up to 10 voters in Maryland who will make Maryland's 10 votes in the Electoral College? Okay, I'll answer that question. The answer is quite simple. The electors must follow the will of the voters. So how the voters of Maryland vote for president of the United States, whoever gets the majority of votes, will get 10 votes in the Electoral College for the vote for president of the United States. That is how it goes, and it's been affirmed several times. So your vote does matter. It's critically important. Please make sure you get out the vote. Okay, Nikki, what keeps you up at night in regards to this election?
So I'm an election official. Everything keeps me up at night. But I would say that making sure that voters have the information that they need to make their plan. There's so much information out there. And I just encourage voters, if you have questions, to reach out to your state or your local election official and good organizations like the League of Women Voters. But find a trusted source of information and go there. That's really voters having the information that they need to make their decisions is the most critical thing, especially this year when a fair amount of how our election is working is changing. It's different early voting dates, it's different locations. Voting by mail, we've seen a huge increase in voting by mail. And that means that there are thousands of voters who are voting a way they've never voted before. And so there's a lot of misinformation out there, and just being able to provide voters with the right information at the right time is really critical. And I think that state and local election officials and groups like the League are doing their very best to get that information out.
Ralph, what have you found to be the most challenging aspect to this election from the traditional role of the League of Women Voters?
We've really been overwhelmed by the shift to all mail-in voting, and one of the difficulties is that normally we've got plenty of time to distribute our voters' guides because most people aren't going to vote until early voting got started. Now, with many people voting much earlier because they requested mail-in ballots, we've really had to scramble to get our voters' guide information up earlier. We've done it, and it is on our vote. But we have in addition to our League website, we have another website we use for people who may not remember which district they live in. Our vote411.org has the same information about the candidates, but to use that system, you just type in your address and it shows you the candidates who will appear on the ballot in your precinct. So you don't have to remember, am I in Congressional District 8 or 4, and which council district am I in? It automatically shows you that. And luckily, because that system is a web-based system, we were able to get that up much more quickly. That was live in the middle of September. Much before we got our paper voters' guides printed.
I do want to point out, in regards to what is on the ballot, that the Maryland questions, and as I pointed out, there are 2 questions on the Maryland ballot. Our Constitution is different than the federal Constitution. It is a lot longer than the federal Constitution. It's much more in detail. There's a lot of specifics that are spelled out in our Constitution. That's just the way that our Constitution evolved in the state of Maryland. So it allows or requires more statewide votes on changes than we ever would imagine the federal Constitution being subject to that type of scrutiny. So I would just urge our listeners to carefully review the 2 constitutional amendments that are on the ballot, the 2 amendments that you're voting on, because they're important amendments. It's a fundamental shift in regards to budget authority between the General Assembly and the governor. I have views about it. I'm not going to express it here, but that's an important point that voters learn about. And the League of Women Voters have just important information that I just urge you to take a look at. The other has to do with expanding legal gambling in Maryland for sports betting. And again, it's a fundamental question that requires your attention. There's good arguments on both sides. So I would just urge people to follow those issues. And in your own counties, you're going to have additional issues that you need to follow. They're all important. I wanted to spend a minute or 2, if I might, on national issues. We expect Maryland's election is going to run very smoothly. We are extremely pleased by the manner in which information has gotten out to the voters of our state. Congratulations, Nikki, for the manner in which you have handled a new system. I think we all were concerned that we were going to be overwhelmed with this dual process of an application and sending out ballots. I must tell you, I've heard very, very complimentary comments from my constituents on the timely way that they've been receiving information and certainly the status of their ballots on the internet is something that the voters really appreciate. So we appreciate that. But we know there is going to be a national interest in this election and not international interest. And I have been part of briefings by members of Congress with our national security team, our intelligence community, and our national elections security people. And we are taking all precautions, recognizing that there may be individuals who want to interfere with our election, and there may be foreign actors who want to interfere with our elections. I was very pleased to hear that all 50 state election officials are working very closely with the national election officials to make sure that all cybersecurity protections are in place and we're all using best practices. So, Nikki, I just want to give you a moment, if you could, explain how you are working to make sure that the risks against cyber attacks, the risks against those who are trying to interfere against our elections, that you're taking all precautions to make sure they're not effective.
Right. So we have been working, cybersecurity and information security has become just paramount to us and has been even in the midst of this pandemic. It is part of our daily jobs, is not only building systems that can withstand attack, but monitoring those systems to see if anybody got through, and then being able to restore those systems in case they go down. And our federal partners at the Department of Homeland Security have been wonderful in supporting us for those efforts with training and with additional resources and helping us monitor. That they have become true partners with us in protecting the integrity of the systems and the data that we protect. And so that is what we are all doing all the time, is making sure that we are protecting the systems and the data. And it's a hard thing to do, but we have a good team in place, and we are sharing resources with our locals and nationally to all work together to protect those systems and data.
And Ralph, I assume the League of Women Voters also need to be prepared for those who may try to interfere with the work you're doing through cyber attacks.
Yes, that is a concern of ours. But I would add, one of the cheapest ways for a foreign actor to influence our elections is to spread false or misleading information. And that is why I would appeal to everybody. If you hear something that is just totally outrageous and shocking, don't believe it unless it is from a truly credible news source, not some fly-by-night outfit. And above all, don't credit information about the election process unless it is coming to you from the Board of Elections. So just bear that in mind, that misinformation is the cheapest way to make a change. And somebody helpfully posted, the Maryland Board of Elections has a rumor control button on its website. And anything you hear about the elections, we encourage you to just go directly to the Board of Elections and check it out.
Ralph, that was a very good way I think for us to really complete this discussion. Ralph Watkins, who is the Vice President, Voters Services at the League of Women Voters, Nikki Charlson, who's the Deputy State Administrator for the State Board of Elections. I think that last point is one that's worth repeating, and that is false information is used to try to interfere in our elections. There is a rumor control number that Ralph already told you about, or I guess on the internet, where the Board of Elections have tried to deal with those rumors. But don't be misled. The election will be on November 3rd. That's going to be the day. Don't let anybody tell you differently. Make your plans to vote now. It's easy. You can vote by mail, you can vote early, or you can vote in person on Election Day. But please make sure you vote. Thank you for joining me today on Facebook Live, and stay safe. Thank you, everyone.